We don't have the murder weapon. We don't have bloody clothes. But today we did find out with that car data that he stayed at his mom's, it looks like 21 minutes.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor, where we're all just trying to survive in a rough world.
What's up, SDS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime, and today is no exception. It is week 3 of the double murder trial of embattled former attorney Alex Murdaugh. Murdaugh, of course, is accused of killing his wife and youngest son, Maggie and Paul, at the family's Colleton County property back in June of 2021. And that, my friends, is just a fraction of the story. Our best guest today, you've seen his face on our program before, Joseph Scott Morgan, always dapper, and that is because he is the distinguished scholar of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University. He's considered one of the leading experts on the Coroner System in the United States. He was a senior investigator for Fulton County for close to 15 years and hosts a podcast with my favorite title, Body Bags, with Joseph Scott Morgan. And then the new face on the program, thank you so much, is Gigi Mi-Kelvey. She is host of the popular true crime podcast, Pretty Lies and Alibis. Pretty Lies and Alibis. You better give it a listen. She's also been covering the Alex Murdaugh trial from the get-go for the Law and Crime Network. And if you can't watch the trial, you've got Gigi, because she is breaking down testimony every day in under an hour. So there you go. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. And if you can't get to YouTube, you can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. And as my 8 and 7-year-old daughters both say, please subscribe and hit that like button. It gets the algorithm chugging. Without further ado, and we're going to get into a lot of forensic stuff today because we've got the grand master of it on the program. But Gigi, you've been in court, I think, from day one. Today was a little unusual. We had a bomb threat. What happened, and where did you take cover?
Well, it was interesting because we just had a new witness get on the stand. He was just getting started. And out of the blue, you hear a police radio go off. And that's something we haven't heard. So I kind of didn't think much of it. And then immediately the judge says that the jury needs to go to the jury room. We're going to take a recess. And then it wasn't until the jurors were out of the room completely, door shut. He stands up. We have to evacuate. We don't know what's going on. You know, we'll come back when we find out what's up. So we go to the door and they stop us and let the Murdaugh family go down first. And then it was, you know, very orderly. The staff there at the courthouse, just amazing, not just today, but every day. And everybody made it outside. We had to go across the street. And then, word starts trickling. It was a bomb threat. Apparently, somebody called in and said there was a bomb in the judge's chambers. So that's what delayed us for a couple of hours in the hot, low country sun. I might add, last week it was like Antarctica. Today it's like the Caribbean. So we were all out there sweating. Somebody passed out waiting to get back in after all this was cleared. It's been a day, dude.
Wow. It sounds like it. Joseph, I know you've been in court. Were you in court on Wednesday when all this went down?
Oh, no. I just cover it. I have yet to go down to the low country in this capacity. I've been to the low country and loved it. It's one of my favorite areas of the Deep South. However, I was sharing camera time with Gigi today. I happened to be on Law and Crime with her. And they do, we do a question Q&A. They invite me in for a Q&A during the lunchtime hour. And it just so happens that my number was up, and I called in, signed in, and I happened to be plopped down in the middle of this thing. And Linda Kenny Bodden and Gigi are discussing this thing. And I'm thinking, I'm here to talk about GSR. I'm here to talk about ballistics, and all of a sudden, they've got me, talking about bomb threats and whatnot. And it gave me pause because I had to reflect back. I was working in Atlanta when Eric Rudolph set off the bomb at Olympic at Centennial Olympic Park, and then of course I was there during that period of time when he bombed the abortion clinic in Atlanta as well. And so, I had to harken back and, kind of, dig back in my files and kind of talk about some of the things, my experiences with that and kind of how that impacts the environment that you're in.
And Gigi, I know you're down in Low Country Monday through Friday, you told me. Is there a place you can go in South Carolina right now where people are not talking about the Alex Murdaugh trial?
I mean, it's pretty hard to find people who aren't talking about it, especially now that the trial's going. In fact, what's funny is my brother, who does not care for true crime at all, I have talked to him more in these 3 weeks since I've started covering this trial. I mean, even my dad, my 88-year-old grandma watches it for 8 hours. So, yeah, I mean, it's all the word here in South Carolina. A lot of people I know knew the Murdaughs personally, so I've been able to get their insight into how they were in, I guess, normal times, or what they considered normal times before all this. But no, I mean, there are people that don't really know the ins and outs, but the murder case, really, most people know about it. It's just not something that anybody's like, wow, I haven't heard that. You don't hear that here.
And Joseph, you're from the South as well. Do you recall a trial of this magnitude taking place this close to you?
I think probably one of the closest things for me that kind of resembles this on one level is probably the Tokars case in Atlanta, or out in Cobb County, where you had the attorney that hired a hitman to kill his wife in front of his small children in a truck, an ex-con that did this. But it doesn't, because that's Metro Atlanta. It doesn't have it doesn't have the Southern Gothic nature that this case does. I was talking with some friends of mine the other day that I told them, I said, I would defy you, and they've had some experience in Hollywood and whatnot. I said, I would defy you to write a script like this and try to walk it into the office of a producer, and you would be laughed out, because it's so fantastical that no one would buy it. They wouldn't believe it. I don't know that Faulkner could dream anything up like this, because it is with all of the ins and outs. This thing it has so many subtleties to it. Whether you're talking about the finances, the interconnectivity of all these family groups that are down there, poor versus rich, kind of the disaffected class. We've heard a lot about that. One of the terms that kind of comes to mind, other than the damn word scion, I think if I hear that one more time, I'll go screaming into the night. The media needs to work on that, come up with a different term, was benevolent kings. I was fascinated by that term. That's a very Southern thing to kind of say, that they could be kind in one moment and threatening in another, that they rule the roost in this particular area of the country. So, I've been fascinated by that.
Interesting you say that. We had a thumbnail on a recent episode, and the thumbnail title was Stranger Than Fiction. We had an author on that day who said the exact same thing as you. He said if you presented a manuscript like this, a fictional writer, it would be laughed at. But
it would
nevertheless, here we are. Gigi, you have a wildly interesting perspective, because you are at the epicenter every day. For those like Joseph and myself who have not been inside the courtroom during the trial, give us a peek inside. What is it like on a daily basis? Do you have a media pass daily? Do you have to get there at a certain time? And once you're in there, the first couple of days, it seemed quite empty. Now the courtroom appears to be rather packed, but what is the atmosphere like inside?
No, I have a pass until verdict. Thank goodness. It's kind of like the golden ticket right now. The first week, I don't think anybody really expected jury selection to finish up that first week. Everybody thought it'll take all week. Maybe we'll start fresh on Monday, but it took 3 days? I think Wednesday we were having openings, and it was so fast. I was getting updates there. They've narrowed it down to 80, 60. We have a jury. Openings are at 3. And so I think that's why people didn't come very much that week, because people here in Walterboro, they don't care. they have to work. They have real jobs. They have families. But I tell you, I've met people from all over the country and the world that have traveled here just to sit in that courtroom. It's surreal because you see videos of him in hearings and you watch these documentaries. But for me, and I've covered starting with Jodi Arias, walking in that courtroom and actually being in the same room with somebody who's accused, innocent until proven guilty, but still accused of butchering his wife and son and the way he did, it sends chills up and down your spine. I had a moment with him where I think it was maybe the second day of testimony at the media stages when he's brought in to get the perp walk. And so there's two sides and there's red tape. So I'm on the opposite side and I'm the only person there. So he gets out and I just said, "Hey, I'm thinking about your mom because she's like not doing well." And people were yelling at him, "Did you look at your wife and son in the face before you shot him?" And I just he's still a human, maybe not a good one. But anyways, he looked over and smiled and nodded. And, it hit me like, wow, in the midst of all that, he seemed like such a normal guy. But to know what he's done, even just financially, it's a whole different feel being inside that courtroom, seeing the family. And then the public that's here, it's almost like they feel like they're sitting in this reality show is how they explained it to me. So you just have so many personalities in there. The jury's very engaged. Court staff's amazing. And it's interesting to watch Alec. He's very friendly with the police officers, turns around and talks to his family sometimes. And for the most part, he gets in his lawyer mode when it's technical testimony, but when it's emotional, talking about bodies, I can only see the back of his head, but he seems to get emotional. But when it's stuff like gunshot residue, he is writing notes, passing them to his lawyer. So he switches, just depending on the topic. It's been weird. Fascinating.
And Judge Newman seems like he is on top of everything. The polar opposite of Judge Ito from the O.J. Simpson case. This guy seems like he's batting down the hatches. Is that right?
What do you think, Mr. Morgan?
Master and commander. You know who is in charge. And he does it in such a subtle way. He's not bombastic. He doesn't point fingers or anything like that. He is just, he is so focused on what he has to do. And who would have thought, that you would find this gem of a jurist in this locale like this. I think, tip of the cap to him because this is high pressure stuff. And he's able to function in this environment with this team of attorneys, high dollar attorneys, and with so much riding on the line. I've been amazed. He's, as just a trial watcher, I think he's a pleasure to watch. He truly is, because I think the watchword is subtle. With him, and it seems as though those members, both prosecution and defense, respect him, but they also understand who is in charge of that courtroom.
It should be noted, he just lost his son, who was 40, I think, a month ago. Just out of the blue, he died of a heart attack and did not delay the trial. He, wanted to make sure that the court's time was used, but still very pleasant demeanor and very gentle. So I have that much more respect for him, knowing what just recently he's lost. So, and that seems to be the feeling of everybody who sat in there, is a very fair judge, but no nonsense. We're not going to waste time.
He seems unflappable, especially in light of what you just said about losing his son. So not only do we have the best guests, but we have the best guests on the right days. Gigi, of course, is a courtroom reporter, and we got her on the day of this bomb threat called in, and we had Megan Fletcher on the stand today talking about GSR, and for that we've got Joseph Scott Morgan here to break it all down for us. So basically the defense started today on cross-exam of the SLED agent, Megan Fletcher, who's an expert in or trained in gunshot residue, trace evidence, explosives, fire debris, glass, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the defense starts off by asking her if it was possible for gunshot residue to be on the witness chair. Basically, I think to make a point that it could get carried anywhere. Fletcher had to answer. She said it's possible. Griffin also goes on the defense to ask if it was possible for Alec to transfer gunshot residue particles to the jacket, this blue jacket that we've heard so much about, if he had been shooting earlier in the day or at any time prior. And Fletcher responds, it's possible as long as the jacket wasn't brushed off or washed. Joseph Scott Morgan, you are the expert on this. GSR deposition, what is it? How resilient is it? Talk to us about how important this forensic evidence is to this case.
I think probably one of the most salient points, Joel, was the fact that early on, first off, I thought that Ms. Fletcher did a very, very good job. And she's what you want in a forensic scientist on the stand. She kept it right down the middle. Her opinions didn't appear to be colored in any way. You know, she essentially stated scientific fact. And one of the things I really like about her testimony early on, it may have been yesterday, I think, where she made comment about the fact that GSR, and this is specifically primer residue, there's a couple of different types of residue. You have propellant, which is, you know, the actual igniting gunpowder that's blowing out the projectile down the barrel. And then you have primer, which is within the, within the primer cap. This is actually a 300 blackout bullet right here, intact. Wow. This is a live round. So right here, I don't know if you can see this real well. The primer cap is right here. That little circle right in the center, concentrically oriented. Yep. Contained within that cap is the firing pin drives forward and strikes that. I'm sorry, let me get it level. Strikes that like that. And it initiates a blast. There's these little portals inside here, and that spark sets off the propellant, which is created in here, where you've got propellant that's being blown out of the end of the barrel. That's its own separate residue, and that has a very specific chemical composition as well. This is a bit more unstable than this because you want to guarantee that it's going to fire. Basic components are barium, antimony, and lead. These are all heavy metals that are naturally occurring. So one of the interesting facts that she brought out, and I love this from a professor's standpoint, is that she stated that none of these items are biodegradable. So let's just take this logic, you know, out going forward. We begin to think about this. Is there some way that this could begin to kind of break down? Well, if we think about anything that's buried in the earth, and these are naturally occurring items, they're not going to break down. They're not going to degrade, which she states, okay? This is not a cellulose-based type of thing. And so with that, you're not going to be able to have it begin to kind of decompose and fall apart. So in order to get rid of it, it has to be cleaned vigorously, okay? I guess there's certain circumstances it could eventually fall away, but that's going to be dependent upon usage, right? And so what was intriguing to me is that she begins to describe how they collected this evidence. And it's something that we've done. We do this in the morgue with question clothing on the deceased. She's doing this on question clothing from a suspect. So she's doing it in a lab. We do it in the morgue, but it's the same principle where you use, they were talking about lifts. Traditionally, what we've used are tape lifts. And so you break that garment down. Do you remember they had that jacket pulled inside out and they had these kind of linear markings on there? That indicates specific zones. So you have like zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4. So you take the lifting mechanism that you're utilizing, maybe tape, and you use that area. You do zone 1, you fold it over, you submit that. You're not seeing anything at that point in time because with gunshot residue, traditionally what you've had to use is scanning electron microscopy in order to pick up on this, to see the little bits that are left behind. And it's so very resilient. What was fascinating is that there was more on the internal surface of the jacket than there was on the external surface of the jacket. And certainly more than the defendant had on his person. You know, when we talk about the shirt, and forgive me, I can't remember the numbers, but they were like 3, 3, and 1. I think I know 1 was found on the hand. So then she goes into this idea, trying to talk about the deposition of this primer residue. And so when this thing is fired, this is going to be it's got a side ejection port on this 300, as well as presumably on the 12 gauge shotgun as well. As the port opens up in order to eject the spent round, smoke comes out of this area in particular. So as you begin, it's like if people at home will take a bit of talcum powder and put it in their hand, kind of angle their hand like this and blow up and kind of watch it drift down. You can actually see it drift down. It's kind of the same principle. The powder itself, or the residue itself, is not very aerodynamically stable. Okay, it's not like a bullet. Okay, where it's traveling down a barrel. This is very non-aerodynamically stable, so it just kind of blows up with the initial kind of inertia that's generated, and then it just kind of drifts down. It settles. So you begin to think about this. Well, she found so much GSR on the interior of that jacket that her rationale, when she was explaining it, she kind of ratioed it out. She said, look, if I continue on with this, I could go on not to infinity, but we've got enough here of a sample to know that it's a robust sample. And I think that defense questioned her on that. He said, well, one, you're saying that is kind of arbitrary, but, three, is 3 arbitrary as well? Does it marry up relative to, I think it was 34 that they found on the interior? And so that was it wasn't contentious, but, she's having to state the science. And I think that many of us have been left to conclude when this thing initiated, and remember, we're thinking, keep in mind, with the 300 blackout alone, I think that there's a total of 5 rounds that were popped off. 5. One you might say, well, we might get a false positive, or you just might get a few. You got 5, just with the 300 alone. Then you got 2 with the 12 gauge. Okay, so you have multiple opportunities to be showered in the stuff. What happened to it? I don't know. Why is there deposition on the interior of the jacket? Did he use this in order to wrap these weapons up? If he did this, allegedly. Did he wrap them up and use them as a conveyance? Well, then it's not so much a deposition of action. It's a deposition of transfer. So if you've got the weapon itself and the housing, where you've got this deposition of the primer residue on that, if you wrap it in the jacket, it's going to contact those areas. And so when you go to examine the jacket, you'll discover it there. And I don't know. I mean, that's a possibility. I don't know that there's any way you can definitively prove that scientifically, but there is contact somehow. And, I've thought about all kinds of possibilities. If he had the jacket on, was he wearing it inside out for some reason? Did he not think that the interior would be swabbed? Or what's a more reasonable explanation? Did he use that jacket in order to wrap the weapons? And then why would he wrap the weapons? Who knows? I don't know. But it's certainly some interesting things came about as a result of this technician or the scientist testimony.
And we'll get more into that testimony a little bit. But that is a man who is passionate about what he does. But Gigi, you're in there watching the jurors. Any reaction from the jurors? Do they tend to look a little more disinterested when we're talking about things that are related to science, as opposed to someone like Alex Murdaugh's mother's aide, who was crying on the stand, Shelley? Or do they seem as riveted by the stuff that rivets Joseph Scott Morgan as they do by the other stuff?
Yeah, I mean, they're engaged every step of the way. The first couple of days, I noticed we had a nodder in there, and I think that's why the judge calls for these stand breaks, because sometimes, especially after lunch, look, I was on the struggle bus. My grandma was taking videos of me nodding off and texting me, telling me, you're on camera nodding off. But no, really, just all jokes aside, they really were. But no, they're engaged. And yesterday morning, when the financial stuff first started coming in, I noticed they weren't engaged. And I mentioned that on air yesterday during our break. But then after lunch, when they started going through individual checks that were actual people that were defrauded by Alex Murdaugh. And you're talking about people that are disabled, people that have been disabled by wrecks, people that have lost a parent in a wreck. They were leaning forward to look at those checks on the monitor. And if you want to look at gunshot residue, everybody just completely engaged. I think, you know, we've had forensic files and shows like that around for a long time now. And I think that's what jurors like. They like to see the proof. This is a largely circumstantial case for the murders. I mean, yeah, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but there's nothing there actually tying into the crime scene. Even the gunshot residue, you know, the last thing essentially that the defense got her to say is, we don't know how or when that got on there. We can't trace it back to one event. But no, this jury's taking it very seriously from what I can see. I mean, they can't take notes, unfortunately, and God bless them, because I take notes and I still get confused. But they financial, scientific, they're on it. They're taking it very seriously from what I can see. And especially the car information today that we got to about the times the car was put in park and not, they were so into that. Yeah. So they're taking it all in.
I'm glad you answered my next question. So definitively, because we've gone back and forth with different guests on this show, some who say they're allowed to take notes, others say they can't, some who say they have to bring the notebook to the judge. But you're saying they are not taking notes, definitively.
No, and I've heard that the judge isn't allowing it, but then I've heard another version, which is nobody's asked for one. I find that hard to believe. There's got to be one person that's a note taker on that. But you know, you think about it, it's kind of like the game where you whisper in somebody's ear and you go down the line. Everybody can hear that testimony. You get back into deliberations and 3 people have heard the same testimony but have something different written down. Then you're bringing issues into deliberation. So they just give them the evidence to look through and you use your memory. So I guess, you know, maybe that's the justification, but no note takers.
That's interesting.
Can I say something? Can I say something about the accountant real quick?
Always.
I got to tell you, you know, look, man, I dig forensic science, but I got to tell you, whoever said accountants are boring missed the mark with this lady. Because I got to tell you, her testimony to me is, and I don't know if there's a direct correlation, obviously, with, you know, the death scene, but just that buildup and that picture she was painting, you know, those interactions that she had with Alex, that one moment in time where she said, and he gave me that stare. Do you remember that, Gigi? You know, she said,
yeah,
he looked at me, and I knew at that time we had to go into the office, and she begins to explain this to him. And I got to tell you, that was dynamite as far as I'm concerned. That testimony, and then the testimony of the Beach family's attorney out of the earshot of the jury when the jury was out. That, and I don't know if he's coming back to the stand, but that was pure fireworks that day.
Yes.
That was 2 days ago, I think. He was dynamic. He doesn't seem like he suffers fools at all, and there's no love lost there between him and Alec.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've noticed too, is the difference in the people that were close to him and the emotions that they're showing on the stand. Where I think it's Seckinger, which was the CFO.
The CFO.
Yeah, and you know, so you can tell by her demeanor, more than anything, she's still just ultimately disgusted and mad by Alec, to where you get Mr. Crosby yesterday, who was a partner. And he's devastated. He's still heartbroken over those losses, to where his seemed more hurt that Alec did them that way. And then the paralegal still is just kind of like, you know, so the varying degrees of what I see is how they feel about him is very interesting. Some people are just hurt. Some people are devastated. And like Seckinger, just ticked off.
So back to the SLED agent for a moment. So the defense continues their line of questioning, and basically they reiterate that SLED did not test the blue tarp. Of course, there's a blue tarp and a blue raincoat. And Megan Fletcher says from SLED that the jacket was balled up inside a closet. The tarp was folded in a storage container, so they didn't test it. Joseph, should they have tested that tarp, by the way?
Yes, everything and anything that had any contact with him, period. After that moment in time when they began to size him up, as numero uno on the hit parade as far as a suspect? You bet. You bet. And, there are any number of things. And, people will preface things by saying, well, I'm not trying to Monday morning quarterback. I am, because there's certain things that you should know better. And if you have an opportunity to collect evidence and test it. Because, one of the analogies I always use for my students when I'm teaching at university is that, I tell them you never can egress across a threshold into a room for the first time again. Once you've done it, you've done it. It's done. You have to be planned up before you go in, and capture everything that you possibly can. You're casting a wide net because you don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going to be important. And, there are any number of instances along the way. I think probably, to my way of thinking, one of the most egregious events from an investigative standpoint in this case was when they had him in that squad car and they had him in that front seat and his attorney's in the back seat. Why in the hell are you still at the scene? Why haven't you taken him downtown? Why isn't he sequestered in a well-lit area? At this moment in time, this quickly after this event, we all know there's not a seminar that we attend as investigators, forensics people, where they tell you if there's a spouse that is still living and you've got family members that are dead, guess who you're going to look at first? You're going to look at the spouse. That is basic 101. Now, people say, well, they were just questioning. It was an interview. It wasn't an interrogation. Yeah, but you should have a mind toward that. So you want to get him away from that environment as expeditiously as possible. And I don't know if there was something that may have been missed that night. I know that you can't look at somebody and examine them with a flashlight out of the scene. You're looking over them to see if you see any particulate matter. If you have the ability to get them down to a headquarters, get them in there, get them in a well-lighted room, have them show their hands on both sides, take pictures of their neck, take their shirt off, take pictures of their back, their front, everything that you possibly can, their legs, because there's always something that's missed. And again, if you miss that opportunity at that moment in time, unlike the GSR, these biological samples like trace elements of blood, this stuff it does degrade and it can be washed off. So those little trace elements that you can document either photographically or you see them, you can grossly appreciate them as you're looking at them in context, the location on the body. That's an opportunity missed. And there was a certain level of comfort that he had in that environment because of his friend in the back seat. That's unacceptable. He wasn't under arrest at that point in time. Why do you need an attorney present? We want to have a conversation with you. Oh, he's my buddy. He's my pal. No, we need to take you down. We need to speak to you, sir. We need to have an interview with you. And there should have been an investigator that was assigned to him at that moment in time. They should have put him in a squad. He should not have access to anything else. As far as a washroom or anything like this, he should have been taken downtown at that moment in time and questioned and photographed thoroughly. I mean, if he wants to fight it, that's fine. You can say, I don't want to talk about it without an attorney present. Fine. That gives you insight into where his mind is at that point in time. Test the waters. You have the authority to do it. And it wasn't done.
Gigi, what about that? What about the fact that he was not taken from the scene immediately? Does this just play into basically the state's hands that this is a good old boys club, Southern good old boys club, and Alex Murdaugh got preferential treatment?
I think it does. And I also am just baffled that friends and family were able to just come right up as the bodies are covered, allowed around in the area. I mean, yeah.
Absurd.
So you have to wonder, why did they not treat him like they would any other suspect, which Mr. Morgan said, take him downtown, put him in that room and say, what happened tonight? But, I think a lot of it does have to do with who he is or was at that time in the community, because the one thing that stood out to me too is on that body cam video, he's all upset. He's talking to the one cop. The other cop walks up. How you doing? Just out of the blue. It's like, a normal, how you doing? But yeah, I was just blown away that, Mr. Crosby testified when they went into the feed room on the 8th, there were still shotgun pellets on the floor. There were things missed. There were things that weren't picked up. you know, and then it seems like the crime scene was just kind of a looky-loo for whoever wanted to come by. So, yeah, I agree.
Think, yeah. And another question, you know, this draws into further question. How much time was taken within that residence? You know, famously, we've seen all of the interior shots of, I guess, from body cam footage of his collection of weapons. But how much time did you take inside of that environment? Oh, and by the way, he's in that environment with them. Do you remember that shot? He's kind of frozen there. He's leaning over a table and there are weapons on the table. He's physically there. I don't want you there if I'm working the scene, period. You're not to be there. If you are refusing me as an investigator the opportunity to examine this area, we'll get a warrant. We'll get a warrant and, you know, let the chips fall where they may. So how, you know, one of the big things I think from a forensic standpoint that you have to consider, because, you know, the timeline gets all wonky, you know, here, you know, we're talking about, you know, there's one thing, you know, one element where they're talking about how, you know, based upon the timestamps on all the digital media, that perhaps when he sent that text to Maggie where he said, "Come here, babe," or "Call me, babe," or whatever, some people have opined that she may have been dead for 5 minutes by that time. And he didn't initiate that 911 call until perhaps an hour or more after.
About an hour 20.
Yeah, an hour and 20 minutes. So, you know, that begs the question, what happened in that house? What happened in it? And, you know, for us, you know, from a forensic standpoint, I want to look at the sinks. Like, not just look at them. I want to take them apart. I want to get the drain traps out, because a lot has been made. How many times have we heard over the course of this trial, they've made a big noise about it? Paul's brain, God rest his soul, Paul's brain was lying outside of his body, adjacent, had been blown out. Okay. Trying to put that as delicately as I possibly can. Okay, well, if you're talking about that and you're talking about blood, but you're also talking about tissue deposition, skin, bone, brain. Well, if you go to clean up, if you got to it at that moment in time, that could be in the drain trap. Guess what? It's not there now, because I don't know who went through that house. Nobody does. Who had access to it if it wasn't locked down? So that stuff would have been, I don't know, maybe it's in the septic tank now, wherever the runoff goes to. It's not like you can go back and find it, because at this point it would be so compromised. I think property's been sold at this point, hasn't it? So
yeah, I think it's their contract.
So, you know, you just think about that, just that simple thing right there. Did you disassemble, you know, did you go into the plumbing? Because one of the big questions here is why is he absent any evidence of blood, you know, on his person, any kind of dynamic blood deposition on his body? Well, I think scientifically you have to ask the question, okay, well, we have to have an explanation for it. Where possibly could it be? And so that's, you know, that's certainly, I think that's problematic. And it's problematic, I think, moving forward. Again, you know, we go back to, you know, what the defense said. You know, you can like them or hate them. It doesn't matter. It's not a matter of like or hate. It's just a matter of, prosecution said they're going to prove this case. Well, you know, GSR ain't cutting it, you know, because again, like I said, if the jacket contained a weapon that was wrapped up in it, well, you can explain that away as transfer. And I guarantee you, when they make closing statements, he's going to mention that in closing statements.
Joseph, it's interesting you bring all this up. I just had Dr. Henry Lee on the show, and I asked him, you know, what is the biggest problem with, you know, processing crimes and crime scenes today? And he said it's crime scene preservation. He's like, you know, evidence gets tampered with, it doesn't get removed properly, and this is exactly what you're talking about. And the sad reality of this case is it's not just blood that could be evidence, but human tissue and brain matter. And it's interesting to hear you talk about that. With that said, Gigi, and Joseph mentioned video. He was talking about the body cam video, but do you think the strongest evidence that the state has right now is what I'm calling this dogtail video, just moments before the murders happen, as well as the Snapchat video where you see him in a different set of clothing, a little over an hour, I think. Is that the strongest evidence they have, in your opinion?
I mean, for me, it's the only thing they can say for sure right now. Everything else is well, maybe, we can explain a lot of this away, but we do have him caught in the lie that he wasn't at the kennels, to where, every person that knew him personally, they play that video. Who do you hear? They name it off. How sure? 100%. And then the Snapchat video, that's what threw me off when I'm thinking about this case, is you hear Paul laughing. He's carefree. He's having fun with his dad. And then to think an hour and 10 minutes later, this kid's head's going to be pretty much off his body and his dad's accused of doing it. But I do think the videos, every time they're played, the jury pays very close attention to the witness and to Alec. And so I think for me, those two videos right now are the only thing in stone we can say is he was wearing something different an hour before, and then just minutes before, he is right there with the two people that would be found dead an hour later. So yeah, I think that's the strongest evidence they have right now. Everything else is a puzzle piece, and you can convict on circumstantial, but I mean, we don't have the murder weapon. We don't have bloody clothes. But today we did find out with that car data that he stayed at his mom's, it looks like 21 minutes. I did the math. So that's one thing too today with that. The car, it took him 16 minutes each way to get there and back. And then 21 minutes that car was in park. So I think those three things kind of bust.
And did he say, did he say he was there for a closer to 40 minutes? Is that right?
He told Miss Shelley, if anybody asks, I was here 30 to 40 minutes. And so the time today puts him there at 21 minutes, which is what she said, 15 to 20. And the defense asked, did you count in the time that you made him wait 5 minutes before you actually opened the door? And she said total. And today she was proven right, if indeed that is correct. But yeah, so I think the videos are huge.
And Joseph, this is not a forensic question, but cumulatively, when there's enough smoke, is there a fire, do you think?
Well, something has to be generating the smoke. So I certainly think so. And this is going to be heavily weighted, I think, toward digital evidence, in my opinion, at least. It baffles the mind, to think that they don't have the weapons. And that's not the responsibility of the police officers. He may have, or whoever did this, discarded them somewhere. Maybe they're hidden. For all I know, they're in a million pieces by now. But those numbers numerically, I was talking to a colleague of mine here at university the other day, and we were having a discussion about, how so much weight is put on DNA now. And we circled back to digital forensics. And isn't it fascinating that the numbers that are associated are those things that validate anything in forensics. And the two strongest bits of evidence that I think that in modern forensics that we can have probably are going to be DNA, because of the astronomical numbers that we deal with, and then that digital signature that's left behind by everybody now. And it's really hard to escape those numbers. I was fascinated, and forgive me, guys, I can't remember. The days run together after a while, but the digital forensics guy, I can't remember, Gigi, he was talking about footsteps with a phone, the movement of, was it Paul's phone, or where it was like 128 steps or 200?
Yeah,
it was,
all three.
when I was sitting there. Yeah, and when I was sitting there and listening to that, I was thinking, my God, I mean, how far we've come, relative to that sort of thing. And it's quite, I think, just from a very broad sense, not necessarily about this case, but, when you look at the study that was done that Obama initiated back in 12, I think, where, some forensic practices now have kind of fallen by the wayside, things like bite mark. It's kind of qualitative. It's not quantitative. If you can't apply a number to it, those things begin to, slightly fall behind the curve a bit. people want to hear about these numbers because there's real surety in that, I think, for many people. And with digital forensics, because I don't necessarily know that DNA would play a huge role in this case, because you've got a familial event. It's not like you're dealing with an unknown, because he has been named as the suspect and as the scion, and so he is there. I think that the source of the DNA could be important. You know, if you were to think about, is it touch DNA, which you would expect to find sloughing skin cells, as opposed to maybe a DNA-rich source like blood or organs, that sort of thing. Now, that could play a difference in it, but that hasn't really come to fruition at this point. It's this digital evidence, the numbers associated with that.
We had a gentleman on the program very recently named Dr. Thomas Heislip, and a person who would only go by his first name, and I am blanking on that first name at the very moment, but they are both experts. The one who kind of remained anonymous currently works for the Department of Defense in digital forensics, and it was enlightening, because it is virtually seemingly impossible to get away with a crime these days because
hard to defeat.
Yeah, because of the digital footprint. I'll give you an example. I was talking today to someone about a YouTuber, never heard of this person, mentioned the name a few times. I go to YouTube, and the first video that pops up is this person. My phone was listening to me. It was creepy, eerie, and interesting all at one time. But one more bit of testimony I want to get to, and then we will jump to some STS Nation questions and comments, and then we'll wrap it up. But Annette Griswold, Gigi, she's a paralegal for Alex Murdaugh. She took the stand today and basically said that Alec was very knowledgeable about the law, and it's something that she respected about him. And then pretty much from there on, it all went downhill for Alec. She said he was always on his phone dealing, and I quote here, dealing with something bigger than what he had going on. And this was after the boat accident. Whatever could be bigger, than his son's involvement in this death of Mallory Beach is pretty big, right? And then went on to say it was consuming his life almost. What did you make of her testimony today, and how powerful was it?
I thought it was really powerful. And I think this thing that he's dealing with, this bigger than this, is obviously knowing he's a Murdaugh. There's probably generational wealth. He knows there's going to be that financial lawsuit coming up. And I think that maybe after this boat crash, I've always said the boat crash was kind of like the little snowball that started down the hill. And it set all this in motion. So I think at this point, he realizes he's going to get sued, and everything that he's done is going to start to come to light as far as the finances, because you have to turn those over. So I really think that was it. But I think that her testimony was so honest, because she talked with emotion about what happened. She felt bad for him. You could tell the disappointment when she found out he had lied and had been stealing. So I think it was, it gives people a daily look at what he was like in just a normal setting, which seems like detached, doing his own thing. We know he had stuff going on with cousin Eddie on the side with drugs. Who knows what all he's talking to people about? But I think more than anything, the walls were closing in, and it prosecution's motive as to why this happened. The fuse was lit on the finances. And when he confessed, he told them he knew eventually he would get caught. I think when something was bigger than everything, that's what it was. It was starting to come undone. So I think her testimony, gave insight into the day-to-days of how the firm worked, which is kind of Alec just came in when he wanted, and when he did, he demanded and demanded. And when they were asking him, well, where's this disbursement, whatever, I'll take care of it, or hey, I'm going to meet him halfway. Those little things tell a jury how he really just took people's trust and just manipulated it into keeping his secrets going, And so I think it was big.
Annette Griswold, in speaking about how small the town is, she uses the fact that Mallory Beach, the young woman killed in the boating accident, that her father is her cousin, the witness's cousin, using that as an example. So I thought that was super interesting, just to show you what a small area this is. She went on to say, Annette Griswold, the paralegal, I said, well, he's been lying this whole time. He had these funds, talking about these missing funds. That's the feeling in the back of my mind was correct. Unfortunately, he did take these funds. Then the video from the kennels is played. And then Annette reads a text from Alec that reads, the worst part is knowing I did the most damage to those I loved the most. How did that hit the jury, Gigi? The jurors, I should say.
You know, I didn't see any major reactions because one of two things. Either he sincerely had a moment where he felt sorry, or he knows eventually these girls are going to be testifying against him in a court of law. And so he's trying to say, I love you guys. I'm so sorry I did you wrong. I don't know. This jury, it's really hard to read, though. There was one time where a juror looked at him, and I just can't remember the testimony, but just looked at him just with laser eyes. Like, I think maybe it had to do with when they were talking about the bodies or something. And then, yeah, so I've seen a couple of jurors kind of roll their eyes with the defense as well on cross-exam. So, but you know, it's just so hard to tell. But the jury really, I think at this point, the two witnesses that they have physically shown emotion for was Miss Shelley and Mr. Crosby yesterday, because he was a partner who he loved Paul, and he made that very, very clear. And he's one of those witnesses that's still very devastated. The jury really had visible sympathy for those two witnesses. And so for me, it just, you know, I was saying to somebody earlier, it wasn't really until I sat down in this courtroom that I actually saw Paul as a victim, because you have the boat crash. And then, you know, he's a Murdaugh, and we've heard that he kind of felt like he could do what he want and not face consequences. And it wasn't until they really started describing what happened to this kid that I saw him as a victim and just a teenager who made, you know, we all make bad decisions. Some consequences are way worse than others. For him, loss of life, a beautiful young woman with her whole life ahead. But at the end of the day, he didn't deserve to have his head blown off. And I think the jury, I can see that too when they're talking about the injuries to Paul, especially. Some of the women especially will react in kind of a, oh my gosh, you know, poor kid. It's going to be an interesting trial from here. I mean, every day is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's a study in human nature too, both good and bad. But Joseph, we were emailing and you wrote, why the 300 blackout? An interesting consideration. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. One of the problems we have in the South, ranging all the way over to Texas and up to, I don't know, Kentucky, Missouri, are wild hogs. And they certainly had a problem with those down at the property Moselle. And so the only time you can really hunt these animals, and they're listed as nuisances, they're pests, they just tear up farmland, is at night, because they're kind of nocturnal. They go back in the swamps and kind of lay low back there, and then at night they come out. And so how do you do that at night? Well, you take a weapon that is fitted with a thermal scope and IR, specifically infrared. So one of the things that I kind of thought about with this case is, out of all of those weapons in his cache that we saw, you know, we've talked about how, or they have talked about how Paul's weapon was missing. There were 3, then some people said there was 2. These weapons were fitted out in order to specifically hunt hogs with. And the thing about it is that in total darkness, that weapon turns the night into day. And I was thinking, why in the world would you use that weapon? I mean, obviously it's a devastating round. It truly is. But you know, one part that I was considering about this is that the shotgun would have been sufficient to the task. Why the 2 weapons? Well, did you have one for a backup, particularly if you plan to do this at night in total darkness and you didn't want to be seen while you were doing it? And from a distance, perhaps, maybe the plan went awry, but you could easily kill a human being with this weapon, and they never understand the orientation of where the shot is coming from, because you have the advantage if you're wielding the weapon, so that, again, you've turned night into day. They're walking around blindly. Even if they see the lights of the house off in the distance, even if they've been drawn down to the dog kennel, you take the lights out and you have decided upper hand. You have an advantage at that moment in time. And because, I didn't see every single weapon. I saw that there were a huge array. I mean, there were a collection of classic deer rifles that were up there, kind of bolt action, things like 308s, maybe 30-06. Had tons of shotguns. These guys like to hunt birds. They hunted quail. They hunted duck. But the 300 Blackout was specifically meant to be used at night. And I really wonder if investigators had considered that. I certainly think that they must have at some point in time.
Interesting take. On to some STS Nation questions and comments. The first one from Gary Watts. This is right in Joseph Scott Morgan's wheelhouse. He writes, the Murdaughs walk around this county like they own it. They were permitted to enter upon the boat crash scene. The beaches were not. Alec walked around the hospital trying to have witnesses change their testimonies. 2 Murdaugh attorneys showed up at the site of Stephen Smith's demise. Alec tried to get his mother's caregiver to change her story. Alec is forceful and could be intimidating, ! I mean, how problematic, though, to the boat crash scene, to the Stephen Smith scene, in terms of interfering with the crime scene itself?
Hey, Gary, thanks for asking that. I'll go you one better. What about Gloria Satterfield? That woman was in the hospital for 3 weeks with head trauma. And for some reason, this is not like she had been in there for 6 months, where people might have forgotten that she entered as a result of head trauma. And her case was signed out by a private, non-coroner physician and released. So, I don't know. You mentioned smoke and fire. I think about that, and I think about, again, going back, Gary, to him seated in that patrol unit there. And they're not treating him like they treat me or you. Okay? He's being treated special at that moment in time. That is not standard protocol of how you treat a witness, that particularly a familial witness, when the standard states that, you look at those people within the intimate circle first. It's a concentric investigation that extends out eccentrically. You start in that tightest group. Who would have the most anger in order to do this? Was it's not like we're in a dark alley in some major city where somebody's shaking you down for money. Okay, this is a very rural, isolated part of America. How many other cases do they have like this up there? I would wager not many, if any at all. So who's your most likely suspect? And yeah, there's an intimidation factor that comes along with this. People have talked about being a solicitor, the family being involved in the solicitor's office, and also judges, and of course, powerful attorneys. So it is problematic. You compromise the scene just merely by their presence. Who allows anybody to go under the tape, as we say, at a crime scene that is not associated with the investigation? And I don't mean associated by virtue of the fact that they're part of the royalty of the county. I'm talking about associated as an investigator or crime scene technician.
Next comment is, excuse me, from Cheryl Ray. Gigi, to you, I'll toss this one. These women make me proud to be one. They're talking about our guests on the previous episode, who are powerful South Carolinian attorneys and an LA former prosecutor. Cheryl writes, I feel like Alex Murdaugh is more than likely guilty, but I just have such a hard time. If he truly had such an amazing relationship with his son, knowing what a shot to his son's head would do, and then doing it, people seem to be grappling with his guilt or innocence, but kind of more so about the evidence pointing in his direction. People in particular kind of calling out the state using, finances as a motive to commit such a horrific crime. Curious, are you hearing that as well? In the not in the courtroom because you can't talk about it, but around the area.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to members of the public that are here just as spectators. I've talked to other reporters. I've talked to other lawyers. Yeah, I mean, people just are grappling with it, and I've had a problem with the state's motive in that I kind of agree with the defense. Why would you put yourself in the middle of a double murder investigation when the fuse is already lit? Your law firm has approached you that morning. He knows it's unraveling. I mean, but at the same time, it's just there's so much that points to it. But for me, I'm still not convinced there wasn't a second person there. I don't know. This is one case I can't figure out. How did he do it? Who was first? Was it that Paul was first, Maggie saw something and was running, or did she see him with a gun and started running? I'm telling you, this is one case I cannot figure out. And I don't know that we'll ever know, but I don't know.
As they say, all it takes is one of the 12 to have enough doubt dusted up.
And I'm going to tell you right now, people that I talk to every day, whether they be professional or people like me who are just kind of members of the community, I always think like a juror. But if I think the general consensus with a lot of people I've talked to is they would not be shocked if this ended up in a hung jury.
So, yeah, I've heard that quite a bit, actually. Lilibeth Vieja writes, the video Paul took those last moments were a God wink to ensure justice was served. That is the digital forensics that Joseph is talking about. And then this next person, Karen Morning, writes, the prosecutors are missing so many opportunities to make things clear to the jurors. They even cut off their own witnesses during testimony. More charts and visuals would be helpful for the jurors, in my opinion. Gigi, do you agree with that too? We are hearing that the state is kind of cutting off witnesses and not following up perhaps at times when they should be.
Yeah, I've seen that a few times. Now, what I've heard is there are a couple of SLED agents that when they testify, they will bring everything into this big picture. And their testimony is kind of going to connect all the dots, and then they kind of reveal what they've got. That's what I've been told, and that will be some of the more explosive testimony. We shall see. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, do I think he did it? Yeah, but I just can't figure out how, and was he alone and that kind of thing.
Couple of quick comments I'm just going to read through, and I've got a final question for Joseph, and then we'll get some final thoughts from each of you. From Sasha, they have not convinced me that he did it. I'm skeptical by nature. They have not proved it, in my opinion. Then Yvonne Holmes writes, there's a reason Maggie was shot 5 times and Paul only twice. Alec has little regard for women. That's why the caretaker, Shelley, was so scared. So some really interesting comments that I get daily. You just got a taste of them. Joseph, a final question to you, the pathologist. I guess we're expecting testimony. What are you expecting there?
Yeah, what's going to be, I think probably what is going to be most compelling for me is that range of fire. I want to know, we've heard a lot, kind of back and forth relative to where the weapon was positioned. I'm not interested in what people think or what the police officers thought at the time. I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. That is the person, the board certified forensic pathologist that will be rolling in there that will give a specific anatomical description as to range of fire, talk about the angle of fire, what position that they believe both of these victims were in for each one of these shots. Some of the stuff I think to a great degree has been speculative or at least vague, and they're going to put a very fine point on it. One of the more intriguing things to what the commenter, forgive me, I can't remember their name, but had mentioned just a moment ago with the number of shots that Maggie had sustained. Those 2 headshots, or approximating the head. Those sound like, the coup de grace, if you will. I'd want to know if those were press contact gunshot wounds, where the muzzle is actually placed immediately adjacent in tight contact to the tissue, where they're located anatomically. Did the shooter move as they were firing this? Like, was there one shot that was, say, more posterior and upward in trajectory, and another one that was maybe more superior to the top of the head and downward in trajectory? And that'll give you an indication of the dynamic of what was going on. Paul's is going to be a bit more difficult to kind of figure out because of how much trauma he sustained. That's always the case with shotgun wounds, and so that's going to be a bit more complicated than Maggie's wounds. I can almost promise you that. But watch for that very carefully. And I'm glad that question has been asked, because I'm sitting on the edge of my seat for it. I don't know when they're going to appear, but I've got a number of friends that have the witness list that are going to ping me as soon as that happens. I'm going to hop on somewhere that'll have me.
I'm sure we will find out soon enough. Gigi Mi-Kelvey is host of the popular true crime podcast, Pretty Lies and Alibis, which, by the way, is very competitive with Body Bags. I love both names, Pretty Lies and Alibis. Make sure you check it out. She's also been covering the Alex Murdaugh trial from the get-go for the Law and Crime Network. And if you can't watch the trial, she's breaking down all the testimony for you every day on Pretty Lies and Alibis. Gigi, what are you looking for in the next couple of days? And I think you said it earlier, but I've been asking everyone. You think we're looking at a hung jury here, an acquittal, conviction? What do you think?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at a hung jury. I don't know that there'll be an outright acquittal, but it only takes one. And I'm going to tell you, the grip that the Murdaughs still have on this community is very tight. I talk to people from gas station attendants to people that work in Walmart, and they see my press badge and they're like, "Oh, you're covering the trial." And I'm like, "Yeah, do you want to talk to us about it?" Nope, not going on camera and talking about a Murdaugh. So, you just don't know. But for me, I'm most interested in the medical examiner testimony and Cousin Eddie. We hear maybe Friday. So I think that's going to be interesting. Cross-examination on that will be entertaining, I'm sure. So those two.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The last episode we had Amy Zimmercheck on, AIMEE for those. I won't even try to spell her last name, but she is Cousin Eddie's attorney, and we'll have her back on once Cousin Eddie does in fact testify. The dapper-looking fellow in the blue sport coat and blue shirt to match, Joseph Scott Morgan, the distinguished scholar of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University, one of the leading experts in all the world on the coroner system, and he hosts his own podcast, Body Bags, with Joseph Scott Morgan. Joseph, I know you're looking forward to that future testimony about pathology, but what else can you share with us about what you're expecting from that perspective in the coming days and weeks?
Yeah, I think that probably the testimony of the pathologist. I'll also be very interested in toxicology results. Again, I'm a science nerd as well. I want to see the complete package, what they had on board that night in their system. I'm thinking that kind of dovetailing with what Gigi said, and I'm really hoping that this is the case, that we are going to see some kind of investigative tieback with other SLED agents that are going to bring them. Because, listen, this case is so broad. It's hard to take the measure because it involves so much. And that's one of the problems with it. We really need somebody to bring this all together, to demonstrate a very definitive, understandable timeline, I think, and then a tighter description on what is believed to have occurred that night. And that's going to begin with the forensic pathologist. If they bring in these other SLED agents, it's going to be fascinating to watch.
Thank you both so much for your time. A quick programming note. Tomorrow we've got another episode of True Crime with Phil and Gil. You get your True Crime Phil. And then on Sunday, I'm doing Carm on the Case. My mom every Sunday will be making her live appearance. We're getting the diva off the couch and getting her working. So make sure you tune in this Sunday. Until then, love you, America.